She hadn't worked a single day since college, and now she was stealing from her dead mother. That was what my father swore under oath to a jury of 9 strangers. I had known his voice even before I was born. I didn't flinch. I didn't turn around. I took a slow sip from the thin plastic cup of water placed in front of me. It tasted metallic, slightly warm, like it had been sitting too long inside rusted pipes that hadn't been replaced since the courthouse was built decades ago. I set the cup back on the polished wooden rail without making a sound. My name is Elena Vance. I am 41 years old. And moments earlier I had been sitting in the witness box in Fairfax County Court, listening to my own father describe a woman I barely recognized. Now I watched him wave a folder full of documents at the jury like it was a battle flag. His face was the color of brick dust. His voice filled every corner of the room that smelled of old timber and cheap cologne. He had no idea what was sealed inside the black envelope resting in my attorney's briefcase. Not yet. In the Vance family, silence had never been treated as discipline. It had always been treated as guilt. Have you ever felt invisible in your own home? As if people looked straight at you but only saw a version of you they had already decided to believe. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I simply sat upright against the hard back of the chair and watched Robert Vance dismantle 20 years of my life with the confidence of a man who had never once been told he was wrong. He wasn't just my father. In his mind, he was the king of this county. A man who had chaired the local council for 3 decades. A man whose opinion decided which roads would be paved and which families would be respected. And to him, I was just the daughter who had run away. The girl who chose an ordinary office job in Washington over the legacy of family land. She's a ghost, Robert told the jury, his voice booming with rehearsed certainty. He used the weight of his reputation to dominate Sunday dinners and public meetings alike. Ask anyone in our town, he would say. Elena hasn't been seen in 15 years. She claims she works for some logistics company, but there's no real company. No office. No website. My investigators found nothing but empty air where her career should be. She's lived her whole life on scraps, he continued. Her mother spoiled her. And now that my wife is gone, she wants to drain what's left of us. I glanced at my younger sister Ashley sitting in the gallery. She wore a designer cardigan I knew had been bought with money from a discreet donation fund years earlier. She stared at her hands like a grieving saint performing for an audience. Robert had spent months whispering into her ear, convincing her that I was a parasite. She had swallowed that story whole, or at least the part that promised her a larger inheritance. Inside me, anger wasn't hot. It was distant, cold, focused. The same detached clarity I had used coordinating evacuation teams on hostile ground. When I looked at the back wall of the courtroom, I realized they had truly erased me. After returning to the farm, Robert had conducted a quiet purge. Letters went out to everyone who had ever known me. The pastor, the hardware store owner, members of the council. They were told I was a professional guest who refused to grow up. I remembered the last time I walked through that house after my mother's funeral. The hallway where my university awards and the framed certificate from my commission in the Royal Cavalry once hung had been stripped bare. All that remained was a faded patch of wallpaper and a cheap tractor calendar. It was as if I had been a temporary hobby he had outgrown. That is what recognition debt feels like. The suffocating pain of realizing that the people who raised you have decided your value is zero simply because they cannot see your strength. Miss Vance, my father's attorney said, stepping forward with a thin smile. Can you provide this court with a single verifiable piece of evidence that you have held paid employment in any organization over the last decade? A payslip? A tax form? Anything besides shadows? I looked at him. then at my father leaning back with smug satisfaction. He thought he had cornered me in a world built on paperwork and public records. I work in operational analysis, I said quietly. My clients value discretion. Documents exist. Your lack of access to them is not my failure. It is your limitation. Robert laughed loudly, the sound echoing against the wooden panels. Discretion. You were a clerk, Elena. A shop assistant at best. Don't try to hide laziness behind clever words. The silver phoenix pin on my lapel pressed against my chest. He had no idea that while he complained about feed prices at the diner, I had been sitting in windowless rooms in Langley making decisions that reshaped invisible borders. For 15 years I had lived in shadow, accepting insults and pity because the alternative was compromising national security. But today the silence was reaching its cost. To him, my life was a blank ledger. If he couldn't see it, it didn't exist. He truly believed a woman's success was measured by how loudly she supported a man's legacy. The cost of silence. That's what we called it at the agency. You don't get parades or plaques. You get grey rooms, secure lines, and sometimes a family that thinks you are a failure because you cannot show them trophies. They had no idea I had been the silent architect of their comfort. When the dairy farm's irrigation system collapsed and Robert faced a 6-figure loss, he thought he had received a lucky private agricultural grant. It wasn't luck. It was my combat pay routed through shell companies so he would never have to feel the humiliation of accepting help from the daughter he had already dismissed. I funded Ashley's master's degree under the cover of an anonymous scholarship. I paid for my mother's experimental treatments when her insurance company folded. I was the ghost in their bank accounts, the invisible hand preventing collapse. And now they were using my secrecy as a weapon to destroy me. Then why, the attorney pressed, did your mother include an active employment clause in her trust? Because she knew you were drifting through life. I met the jury's eyes. In small towns, honest work means calloused hands, not analyzing intercept logs inside secure facilities. My mother understood my life better than anyone here, I said. She built that clause to protect the trust from people who would claim I contributed nothing simply because they couldn't see the results on local news. Robert barked another laugh. You sat at a desk pushing paper while your sister cared for this family. At 12 he had told me I was a phase, not a future. That my only path to power was marriage or noise. He couldn't imagine a world where I held more authority than his entire council. This isn't about money, is it, Robert? I asked, dropping the word father. It's about control. You couldn't control where I went, so you rewrote where I've been. I'm showing the world who you really are, he shouted, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Be careful when you search for truth in the dark, I replied softly. You may not like what looks back. The attorney turned theatrically to the jury. He described the investigator's report. No North Atlantic Logistics Group at the listed address. Only a rented post office box. No corporate health plan. No digital footprint. The truth is simpler, he said. Elena Vance is a ghost because she has nothing to show. Ashley took the stand with practiced fragility. She spoke of my disappearances, of mortgage payments she claimed to have handled alone. Then she revealed bank statements showing thousands withdrawn from our mother's account, signatures that looked forged. They were reimbursements for private nurses I had hired when Robert refused outside help. But she didn't mention that. The room's indignation felt physical. Still, I didn't reach for my lawyer's hand. I didn't look at Robert. I stared instead at the courtroom door. Is that all? I asked quietly. You've been caught, Robert snapped. You're a thief. Sit down, Mr. Vance, Judge Miller warned, though his attention lingered on the phoenix pin. I turned to my attorney, Marcus Thorne. He wasn't local. He wore his suit like armor and had spent 2 decades in the JAG Corps before taking specialized private clients like me. He stood calmly and opened his briefcase. Your Honor, Marcus said, the plaintiff's investigation was thorough by civilian standards, but it was searching for a person who, for reasons of national security, is not permitted to exist in public databases. He produced a heavy black envelope sealed with wax embossed by a gold eagle. Due to allegations of criminal fraud, he continued, my client has been granted a limited waiver. We submit a verified statement of service and employment status pre-authorized for judicial review. Robert's smirk flickered. What is that? The opposing attorney demanded. Everything, Marcus replied. Judge Miller took the envelope slowly. He opened it with a silver letter opener while the fluorescent lights hummed overhead. He read once. Then again. Seconds stretched like wire. When he looked up, his face had changed. Not a wary county judge anymore. An officer. You have built this case on the premise that Elena Vance is a ghost, he said. You accused her of fraud, theft, and indolence. I hold here a verified statement from the Director of National Intelligence confirming she has served for 15 years as a senior operations director within the Central Intelligence Agency. The room didn't just fall silent. It froze. Robert's jaw slackened. Ashley made a strangled sound. The logistics group you mocked, the judge continued, is a Tier 1 cover designation. The blank spaces in her records are not proof of failure. They are proof of excellence. She was not hiding. She was protecting the very world you inhabit. For the first time in 21 years, I felt seen. Bailiff, the judge ordered. Secure the doors. We are moving to an in-camera proceeding. Robert tried to speak but only managed a cracked whisper. She said she was an analyst. I told you what you were cleared to know, I replied. You weren't seeking truth. You were collecting pieces for a story you preferred. The silence that followed was different. Not heavy with judgment. Clear. Final. Later, when the hearing ended behind closed doors, and the accusations began to collapse one by one, I stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The town square looked smaller than I remembered. Ashley stood a few steps away, uncertainty replacing performance. Robert remained inside, finally forced to listen instead of speak. For years I had believed invisibility was the price of duty. That being unseen meant being unvalued. But as I walked toward my car, the phoenix pin warm against my skin, I realized something else. Ghosts only haunt the past. I was still here. And this time, I was no longer silent.